Welcome to Eleanor's World, my fellow and lovely members of the Lumos Lounge, your destination for magical stories and unforgettable journeys. Don't forget to comment the video. And for all of you that aren't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Thank you for joining and helping to keep the magic alive. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Lovely members of the Lumos Lounge, welcome back on my channel and to Chapter 6 of A Soulless Angel by Time Traveler 1900. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the magic. Chapter 6, Confrontation at Gringotts. Ordinarily, Harry would have noticed the adrenaline rush brought on by the Gringotts carts, but this time, he was too lost in his thoughts to notice the journey. He was too busy thinking through his plans. He was too busy thinking about the desire to travel to America, to the Makusa, and thinking about his fears that even when he finally came of age, Dumbledore and Fudge would find a way to keep him trapped. If they did that, he would become a Dark Lord, and he would lash out in ways even Voldemort would have envied. Vault 665, the goblin sent to escort him announced. Harry nodded solemnly. He stood up and followed the goblin, who waited until he was standing right outside the vault. The goblin waved his large, long, pointed hand over the lock, and it opened slowly. His mother's vault had a small pile of gold within it, but Harry wasn't interested in that. His interest was tucked neatly in the shadows, near the side of the vault. To the right of the pile was a long, thin box. Harry picked it up and opened it, revealing the two custom wands within. He smiled fondly at the wands he had left in this vault before his third year at Hogwarts. When he'd had the wands created, Harry had been reeling from the attack by the shade of Tom Riddle, who'd taken his wand. After some research, Harry learned the wands made by Ollivander were mass-produced. After passing through the Hogwarts wards, they activated the trace, allowing the Ministry to track them. After discovering the basilisk parts were valuable, Harry secretly summoned a group to Hogwarts to strip it down, receiving a hefty profit, which he put into a new vault under a different name. Later, before Marge turned up, Harry traveled to Nocturne Alley, where he commissioned a custom wand crafter to design a pair of new wands that would work only for him, free from the trace. The wand crafter had taken the job with gusto. Many wizards and witches, wanting to avoid Ministry control, went to crafters like him. He had risen to the occasion wonderfully. Harry's original plan had been to wait for the crafter to finish, go back to Nocturne Alley, and put them in his mother's vault after trying them out for safekeeping. But Marge had changed the plan slightly. Still, the wands were kept safe. Harry was just relieved he hadn't been stupid enough to take them both to Hogwarts. The last thing he wanted was to lose these beauties to those fools after being accused of mass murder. No, don't even think about that. Opening the box, Harry smiled as he admired the two sleek wands. 13 inches long, with a U outer casing and a ceramic inner casing, lined with runes and 2 diamonds mounted at the tips of the handle. Their cores were Rougarou hair, sitting in an enclosed vial of Rougarou blood, a dangerous magical being. The hairs were known for their affinity for the dark arts. "Hello, my friends," Harry smiled, before closing the box and sliding it back into his inner coat pocket. He turned back to the goblin. "Could you take me to my trust vault, please? I'd like to collect some muggle money from there before returning to Senior Account Manager Bloodbringer's office." "Very well," the goblin replied. Harry nodded and they both got back on the cart. Once he finished with his business in his vaults, Harry was returned to Bloodbringer's office. The moment the old goblin saw him, Bloodbringer held up the scroll he had been reading. "The Wizengamot are certainly determined to keep you in Britain, Mr. Potter. They can do this easily at this point, as you are still under 17. But when you reach your majority, their options will become limited. Unless Fudge, Dumbledore, and the rest of those intellectual giants come up with a second scheme to keep me here," Harry muttered, frustrated that his plans to emigrate to America had been disrupted. "Senior Account Manager Bloodbringer, I discovered enough about Hogwarts to learn that if I take the Owls and Newts back to back within the same year, and if I take up Masteries, then I could prove I'm a qualified wizard. Is that possible now in my unique case?" Bloodbringer sat back in his chair. The question had rocked him, but he recovered quickly. "I don't see why not, Mr. Potter. However, you will need to be extremely quick in your plans." I figured as much. If I don't do this, Dumbledore will keep me locked up in this stinking shithole of a country. No offense. For the rest of my life, Harry scowled, imagining himself confined by the Ministry of Magic. He conjured an image of himself at 80, still pining for freedom, but knowing it would never happen. He was determined to make sure the Ministry didn't make that mistake, and an even nicer image of the Ministry in flames filled his mind. The thought of destroying the Ministry with their magical brethren's fountain, shattered into a million pieces, was oddly satisfying. He shook his head to rid himself of the images and turned his attention back to Bloodbringer. I learned about my American cousins a few years ago, but I was never able to contact them. Are there any other methods of getting in touch with them? Bloodbringer nodded, knowing how important this was for Harry. Barring conventional owl post, which is far from ideal, there are protean journals or two-way mirrors. They're very simple, enchanted to allow communication over large distances. You simply say the name of the person you're trying to contact, and they will answer it, and vice versa. An enchanted communications mirror. I never knew they existed, Harry mused. I've heard of protean journals. They use the protean charm, and you write messages in them, and the second journal picks them up, right? That's correct, Mr. Potter, Bloodbringer replied patiently. Harry mulled over the options. I like them both. Where can I buy them, and how can I send them off without the Wizengamot or Dumbledore interfering? You believe they will, especially after your defeat of the Dark Lord? They did before, Harry reminded the goblin. Dumbledore went out of his way to draft legislation preventing the Potters from America from coming here and visiting. Never mind adopting me. He grimaced at the thought. The sooner I rebuild bridges with them, the better. As far as I'm concerned, those fools didn't have the right to decide where I lived just so I would fight off their Dark Lord. Voldemort was going to come after me, no matter where I lived or who I lived with. Bloodbringer nodded. The Dark Lord had shown an obsession with the last British Potter. I can arrange for you to have the protean journals and the communication mirror right now, Mr. Potter, and I'll charge it to your vault. I don't care, as long as I get to speak and meet with my family, Harry replied, his stomach fluttering with anticipation. The doubts he'd had with Sirius Black seemed irrelevant now. He'd been unsure about the convict his godfather had become, who'd cared more for revenge than looking after his newly orphaned godson. But the Makusa offered hope. If that hope turned out to be as empty as Sirius's promises, then Harry could emigrate somewhere new. It wasn't a problem for him. Bloodbringer wrote a quick message on a sheet of parchment. With a wave of his long fingers, it vanished. A few minutes later, there came a knock on the door. Enter! Bloodbringer barked. The door opened, and a goblin stepped inside, carrying a small but bulky package. He dropped it onto the desk and bowed to Bloodbringer before walking out and closing the door. Bloodbringer opened the package, revealing 2 leather-bound books and 2 mirrors. I will give you a journal and a mirror, Mr. Potter, he said. I'll send the other 2 in the sets to the Makusa now. Harry nodded, watching as Bloodbringer wrote a note, waving his fingers to summon an envelope and placing the letter inside. He wrote a second note, putting it into another envelope. Then, he repackaged the journal and mirror and placed them in the out tray, where they vanished. My counterpart in the Makusa will receive the package and the letters now, Bloodbringer reported. Now, is there anything else you need? Harry thought the question through for a moment. No. Oh wait, there is something you can clarify for me. During the Triwizard Tournament, Dumbledore, Barty Crouch Sr., and Ludo Bagman told me I was in a competition for wizards who were of age. Remember, I sent you a letter in the goblin message box, and you told me I was an adult, recognized by magic. I want to know if I can get into Potter Manor now. I wouldn't know for sure, Mr. Potter, Bloodbringer said, recalling how interested Harry had been when he first learned about Potter Manor's existence. He had been determined to find other properties at the time. However, we can try now. Bloodbringer opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small box, handing it to Harry. It reminded him of the ring boxes Muggles used for engagement rings, except this box was covered in runes and the Potter family crest. Harry opened it to find a dark metallic ring with a small ruby mounted on it. He recognized it immediately as a head ring, similar to those worn by Lucius Malfoy and Arthur Weasley. With this ring, he would be seen as a true adult in the magical world, even if he was a couple of years early. This ring would grant him several abilities, like no one being able to read his mind. With luck, it would also give him the location of Potter Manor. Traditionally, the head ring would grant him information when it registered his adult status and age, usually when he reached his magical majority. But since the Triwizard Tournament had deemed him old enough, Harry hoped the ring would see it as a loophole, granting him not only the location of Potter Manor, but also clearance to enter. For a moment, Harry was disappointed, as there was nothing. Then he felt something. Knowledge of the family's history filled his mind. Chunks of his ancestors' personalities crossed his consciousness, and memories flooded in. Images of the various Potter properties flowed through his mind like a gently flowing river. Harry now knew how to enter them. Harry nodded to Bloodbringer. "The rings accepted me," he said distantly as he tried to control the flow of information. But before he could speak further, there was a knock on the door. Impatiently, Bloodbringer turned to the office door. "Enter," he barked. The door opened. A goblin walked in but didn't come further into the office. "My apologies, sir," the goblin said. "Albus Dumbledore is here in Gringotts. He says he wishes to speak to your client." Bloodbringer turned to Harry. The young wizard looked annoyed but resigned. "Dumbledore's agents must have told him I was here," Harry commented. "Several people saw me walking through Diagon Alley. I went without a disguise because I wanted the wizarding world to know I was out. It also means Dumbledore knows I'm here, and I haven't left." Bloodbringer could see Harry wasn't happy. "We can delay him," he suggested. Harry considered the offer but shook his head. "Tempting, but no," he said. "Dumbledore doesn't like being told no. He'll keep pushing until you relent. Might as well let him come in. But take your time. Don't take too long, if you catch my drift," he smirked at the waiting goblin. Both goblins grinned viciously. Goblins weren't fans of wizards at the best of times, but Albus Dumbledore had caused them more than a few problems over the years, and what he'd done with the Potter heir was a nightmare in itself. Harry had only kept them quiet about it because he didn't want to tip off the old wizard. It would disturb so many of his plans for freedom. He didn't need the trouble now, not with so much at stake. Bloodbringer turned to the second goblin. "You heard the young man?" he said with newfound respect. "Lead him around and bring him here." "Try to take—" "Oh, he pretended to think up the amount of time, half an hour? 3/4 of an hour?" The goblin grinned like a shark and was gone, closing the door politely behind him. "Hello, Harry." Albus Dumbledore managed to hold off his fatigue and annoyance with the goblin, who claimed to be new, who'd led him around the maze of corridors in Gringotts through sheer experience and self-control. For a moment, Dumbledore cast his eyes over the young wizard in the office. His heart ached when he saw the toll Azkaban had taken on Harry. The shoulder-length white hair was still matted, but far cleaner than it had been before. While he was stronger now, in build, there were signs of hollowness in his cheeks. But what scared the old wizard the most was Harry's eyes. His emerald green eyes, once sparkling and full of life, despite everything he'd gone through, were harder and colder, like the power was contained in a cold, frozen lake. Dumbledore knew a large chunk of the blame for Harry's current state rested on his shoulders. But while he had tried to protect the boy, he'd eventually been caught up believing the lies Severus and Barty Crouchjump had given him about Harry. So, he'd turned his back. Discovering the boy had always hated him hurt, but after witnessing those memories of Harry's life pre-Hogwarts, he could understand it. "Mr. Potter to you!" Harry's cold voice snapped Dumbledore back to reality. Dumbledore blinked in confusion. "I beg your pardon? My name is Mr. Potter? Only my friends can call me Harry. And you are not one of them," Harry snapped. Dumbledore flinched, knowing he had nobody else but himself to blame. "Very well, Mr. Potter," he said, knowing his habit of ignoring people's wishes would cause problems later. "First, let me say, on behalf of myself, the Wizengamot, the Wizarding World, and Hogwarts, I apologize from the bottom of my heart for your imprisonment." Harry was silent, but Dumbledore could hear the hissing of breath as the boy's chest rose and fell while he glared back at him. Dumbledore could see Harry was incandescent with rage. "That it?" Harry asked, his voice cold. A little concerned Harry seemed unemotional, Dumbledore decided to go on. He took out 2 scrolls from his robes and placed them right in front of the boy. Harry eyed them untrustingly. I assure you, they're not dangerous. Ha, Mr. Potter, Dumbledore said. Harry didn't touch them. What are they? One of the scrolls is a pardon and release from the Ministry, countersigned by Fudge, Madam Bones, and myself. It also contains an order for compensation, 1,000,000 galleons. Harry snorted in disgust. Does Fudge think money is going to erase the fact I've lost a whole year of my life? Dumbledore went on, knowing the boy had taken it as an insult. After seeing what Harry had gone through, Dumbledore couldn't blame him. The second one is a readmittance to Hogwarts. You'll receive another from Hogwarts when you get your list for the upcoming year. Harry glared at him. All right, I'm coming back to Hogwarts. You win. I would have wanted to go to a different school to get a fresh start. Speaking of which, I will be resorted when I get back. Dumbledore looked down at him in disappointment. Since we have no choice, since you would die and lose your magic, something we don't want, you'll have to be resorted. You shouldn't have done that, Harry. How will you forgive your friends if you're in a different house? I don't have any friends, Harry replied brutally. Everyone turned on me when I was made a champion in the Triwizard Tournament. The time between that night and when I proved my innocence proved to me that friendship is a pointless weakness. Later, they stood back and joined in when I was accused of mass murder. I got the message. You can't trust anyone. I learned that during my years with the Dursleys, but I didn't follow that lesson. Dumbledore flinched. What? You don't like being reminded of how you condemned me to a life of solitude? And yet you kept forcing me to see them as family, trying to make me enjoy a childhood that simply didn't exist, Harry said with contempt. It's amazing how many different contradictory sides to your nature exist, Professor. One side of you seems to care for everyone, and yet another sees people as pawns. I know you turned many students into child soldiers during the last war, and how you did nothing when Grindelwald was running unchecked. And yet, you dare claim I'm a potential Dark Lord when you keep pushing me there more than once? Dumbledore glowered at Harry furiously. He had gone to a lot of trouble to keep his actions during Grindelwald's rise to prominence contained and quiet, but he was furious when Harry accused him of creating child soldiers and throwing in his inner fear of Harry being overwhelmed enough to become a Dark Lord. Harry, I am trying to keep you safe, and I didn't turn anyone into child weapons, Dumbledore protested. Oh no, so the time when you made me Granger and the Weasel go after the Philosopher's Stone in a trap that was easy to break into wasn't a training program, and you didn't manipulate anyone into joining the Aurors when they weren't suited to the job or fighting the Aurors when they weren't suited to the job or fighting the Death Eaters. There was a sneer in Harry's voice. Before he stood up, a glint of light caught Dumbledore's eye. He thought he saw a flash of ruby. His heart stopped. No! Harry couldn't have done. You're not playing that game with this time, Headmaster. I don't care what you do to anyone else. You can clean up the mess for a change, but I want you to leave me alone. Harry turned to Bloodbringer, who'd been listening with amusement and even admiration. The boy's hardened, expressionless calm faded a little, and a genuine smile appeared on his face. Thank you for your help today, Senior Account Manager. Harry turned back to Dumbledore, and his face became a blank mask with his eyes becoming harder. I'll be on my way then. One moment, Harry. There's the matter of where you will be staying for the summer. You will not tell me where to go. Harry, you are a minor, Dumbledore protested. You can't be on your own, especially in your current state. You're a powerful, very angry young man. You need to be around people to help you. Oh, I will be hanging around other people to keep me sane. But I don't plan on being around anyone I know, Harry said. Dumbledore didn't like this. He needed the boy to be watched so he could forgive. Harry, the Weasleys, Sirius, and Andromeda Tonks are waiting in the leaky cauldron, hoping you will spend the summer with them. Harry's mouth was opening with the refusal on the tip of his tongue, but he blinked in surprise. Andromeda Tonks. Harry ran the name through his mind, but nothing rang a bell. Who's Andromeda Tonks? A distant cousin. Incidentally, she's Sirius's cousin. She was friends with your parents, Dumbledore explained. Why am I hearing about her now? Dumbledore closed his eyes. Made sure you didn't meet her, Harry. Harry scowled at him. Don't tell me. Let me guess. You did what you did with the Potters living in the Makusa. You used your position to keep her from meeting me, from taking me in, all because you wanted me to be your little weapon against Lord Voldemort. You know, I wonder how many sins will be shoved down your throat when you finally die. With that, Harry walked out. He didn't bother to say anything else, as there was nothing he could do. It was in the past. Dumbledore stood there in the office, stunned. The goblin's chuckling and shuffling of the papers on his desk made him return to reality, and he rushed off after Harry. Bloodbringer chuckled harder. That boy grows on me. The moment Dumbledore left, Bloodbringer leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. That boy's got fire, I'll give him that, he muttered. He'll be a force to reckon with. Harry, already out of the office and back on the cart, took a deep breath. He felt lighter, the tension of the conversation with Dumbledore dissipating as he rode back. He couldn't help but think about everything that had happened today. The wands, the journals, the mirror, and most importantly, his potential escape from Britain. He had plans now. Real plans. And for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope. Where to now? The goblin asked, interrupting Harry's thoughts. Back to the leaky cauldron, Harry answered, settling back into the seat, his mind racing through the possibilities. The last few months had been full of struggle, uncertainty, and anger. But now there was a way out. America. A fresh start. He'd get there. Somehow. And no one would stop him. As the cart sped along the tracks, Harry thought about his future, what it could hold. He had to keep moving forward. He had to stay one step ahead of Dumbledore, Fudge, and the Ministry. The stakes were high, but Harry felt an unfamiliar sense of determination. When they finally reached the surface, Harry stepped off the cart, nodding to the goblin. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. He was leaving. He made his way out of Gringotts and into Diagon Alley, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was still a marked man, but not for much longer. Soon, he would be free. As the cart sped along the tracks, Harry thought about his future, what it could hold. He had to keep moving forward. He had to stay one step ahead of Dumbledore, Fudge, and the Ministry. The stakes were high, but Harry felt an unfamiliar sense of determination. When they finally reached the surface, Harry stepped off the cart, nodding to the goblin. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. He was leaving. He made his way out of Gringotts and into Diagon Alley, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was still a marked man, but not for much longer. Soon, he would be free. At the leaky cauldron, Harry could feel the weight of his decision settle over him as he stepped inside. His eyes met those of the few patrons sitting at tables, and he saw their recognition. They didn't know him, not really, but they knew the name. And that was enough to make them look away quickly, as if he were carrying a curse. Maybe he was. He approached the counter, where Tom greeted him, his usual bright smile dimmed slightly at Harry's appearance. "Everything all right, Mr. Potter?" Harry nodded. "Just need a room for the night," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "and a quiet place to think." Tom nodded and handed him a key. Room 7, as usual. Harry took the key and made his way up to his room. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, he let out a long breath. Alone. Finally, alone with his thoughts. He sat on the bed and stared out the window at the bustling street below. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow, he would take the next step in his journey. He had a future now, and it would not be controlled by the Ministry or Dumbledore. The days passed quickly. Harry spent his time making arrangements, tying up loose ends, and preparing for his departure. He was no longer the boy who had once relied on others. Now he was a young man with a mission that would take him far from everything he had ever known. And as the time drew closer, Harry felt something stir inside him. It was the same feeling he had when he faced Voldemort. It was the feeling of destiny. He was meant for something bigger than this. The last night in London, Harry sat in his room, staring at the mirror. He had been using the Protean journal to communicate with his cousins in America. The mirror was a backup, just in case. He had a lot of questions, but most of all, he had hope. Tomorrow, everything would change. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my Amazon wishlist or consider making a donation. Every little bit helps to keep the magic alive. See you next time, and until then, take care and keep dreaming.